All right. Welcome to another episode of Breaking Changes. My name is Ken Lane. I'm your host today. I'm the Chief Evangelist for Postman. And with me today, I have Chris Traganos from Stripe joining me. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Ken, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for joining me. I have been really eager to get you on the show and learn more about your style and how you all run your community over there and how you do what you do. So I'm really stoked to have you here. Our audience is pretty wide. This show tends to go out to business users, and I'm not going to assume everyone knows who Stripe is. I mean, I'm hoping they have an idea who Stripe is, but let's start with the basics. What is Stripe?
For sure. So Stripe is first and foremost a technology company, and we focus on building economic infrastructure for the internet. So this means businesses of any size, right? So startups all the way to public companies, they're using our technology and our software to build online payments and to run their financial operations in, I think at this point, over 100 countries around the world. And so that's the summary of what Stripe is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, any startup I've ever done, any app that I've built, I mean, once you hit that point where you need to make some sales, sell some products, some services, do anything financial, Stripe's where you go. I mean, you guys are the foundation of what I would say is the API economy, as far as making it so that we all can make money doing what we do. But would you say that direct, payments is the biggest impact Stripe's made? I mean, I feel like you guys have also made an impact on just how we think about APIs, or I know you guys make lots of investments. I mean, what is the greatest impact Stripe's made to the ecosystem, would you say?
So I'll just speak from my perspective. I don't know what the official, biggest contribution would be, but I would say, from what I see and from my experience, the biggest contribution Stripe's made for in terms of impact is just first and foremost, we were focused on the developer experience, and so it's pretty exciting to work on a product that, I mean, we put so much time into our docs, our web pages. Just the experience of a developer connecting up into the API. Obviously, we can talk about vanity numbers and everything, but just how many updates even a day we're putting into the API, all the parameters, the functionality for testing. It's pretty fun to be on the inside and see just how much, first and foremost, we focus on being a developer experience company.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, because that's what I think of. I mean, y'all are a shining example that I point to when it's like, how to do your docs well, there's just so much that you guys bake into, I would say, the overall developer experience. So how do you see product adoption and developer experience working together in this way when it comes to getting people learning about Stripe, onboarding, and actually putting it to use in their applications or business? How does developer experience feed into that?
I think you think a lot about. I remember back in the day living in San Francisco, you'd see that huge. I always got inspired by that Twilio billboard, right? It's the big one off the 101 or 280 that said just like Twilio, ask your developer. I do think that we do best when we are the first recommendation from the payment infrastructure team or the payment architects or the developers that are trying to get a thing done, and they know they need to rely on a product that works for them. It is going to be able to support whatever they need. And I think, I mean, it's pretty wild the different ways you're going to be using Stripe to customize it for your own payment flow. And so, I mean, every single company's revenue model is different. And so it needs to be about as adaptable and extendable as possible. And so I think how that leads to adoption mostly is recommendations, right? So I think we just hit our 10 years as a company, and you would imagine for the majority of that time, it's word of mouth from developer to developer. You think about there's startups, right? There's venture-backed startups that very often will build a product, and then demo day comes, like, oh my gosh, we need to have our pricing page. Like, payments is the afterthought because they're focused on maybe hitting certain other numbers, but then the rest of the world, right, is trying to accept revenue, collect revenue, and collect payments on day one. And so they're going to be looking at what's the top tools to accept payments, and we want to always be on the whatever developer community is, right? Whether it's enterprise, SMB, startups, we want those actual frameworks that they use in those communities for it to always be like, it's Stripe. You definitely use Stripe. It's going to just save you headaches.
Yeah, I've built a lot of commerce apps. I've been building and running teams since the 90s, and I've worked with a lot of payment providers. And you mentioned allowing us developers to do what we're doing best and focus on what matters so that we can make money. And one of the things that changed when I started using Stripe is I don't have to think about PCI compliance in like I used to. I used to have to all of a sudden become a security expert and think about how I'm storing credit cards and how I'm doing things. And Stripe's abstracted away the payments industry, but also a lot of these other things. So I can focus on what I'm doing best. And I think that's what fed into me having more time to even spread word of mouth like that Stripe matters, is because I don't have a headache of having to store credit cards. And I can probably go on and find a lot of other things that have fed into that. But do you see that with your developer communities? Is they're just able to do more of what matters to their business each day because you guys have kind of abstracted away a lot of this complexity?
Yes. So I would say, I'll speak from the developer's perspective, right? So you and I both are in the developer relations world. First off, Ken, I've been to many of your talks, so it's fun to chat about like developer experience with you, because I know, we've two old dogs have been thinking about this for a while. So I think for payments, for Stripe especially, my impression from the outside, I joined about 3 years ago, but my impression was always like, all right, it's an API, fire some card numbers at the API, make a request, get a response, 200 okay, payment succeed. And now working here and now just being in the financial world, like, you realize how much online payments, how much more complexity there has been in the last couple of years with online payments, right? And so there's payments, but you're referencing like there's this whole other world of know your customer. So customer onboarding, and customer payment collection, right? So how often do we sign up for like a marketplace, or like, oh yeah, I got to add my ACH, bank routing info, or add my card info, and it's like how much weight is on the individual entrepreneur or company owner to maintain all that details, right? And so, not to mention, most developers, especially in the Western world, can tend to forget that there's a whole lot more than just cards, right? And so if you're accepting payments somewhere else in the world, like the burden and the regulatory requirements to just run a successful compliant business is intense. And so there's this whole other world of like Stripe Connect, right? So we build platform tools for platforms to be successful. Definitely some of the biggest platforms in the world, marketplaces of the world, are using this tech. Collecting customer data and storing it safely is pretty dang important. I think beyond payments too, you think about, so if you want to accept in-person payments, maybe you're a concert, you're running like a live events company, or you're running some store that you are internet first and you want to, have a point of sale system. Another thing that was eye-opening to me is how much burden a founder has to deal with syncing up in-person point of sale systems, online orders, mail orders, phone orders, and how often like many companies struggle with having a single place of truth for customer records and product details. And then, I could go forever about the complexities of doing payments right, not to mention optimizing it so that you're actually not leaving any any money on the table.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, there's so many, these are all things you don't learn until you're down in the trenches doing these things and realizing, and you're just tactically kind of piecing it together. And that's, I would say, part of your guys' developer experience that I've noticed is is you guys aren't, I wouldn't say abstracting and hiding these things away. It's actually part of like, your rollout of new services and the overall, your docs, your SDKs and your tools and everything kind of helps us think through all of these things and know that there's actually a strategy to it, even though I, as the entrepreneur, maybe haven't encountered all of these needs. And I've seen it in your docs. I can go find it and learn more about it. And when it comes up in my daily work. So what is the biggest, what would you say when it comes to developer experience is top of mind for you when it comes to helping reduce friction for us new customers who come across Stripe and are trying to get going?
So I think in terms of one of the top things that let's step back, reducing friction and pain points, improving the developer experience. One thing that is top of mind for me and our team of developer advocates at Stripe is developers are, so no question, developers are very smart. Developers are masters in many languages, many frameworks, understanding how complex systems work. One area of difficulty we continually run into when especially a senior developer starts getting up and running with payments, is the semantics and the terminology are between payment infrastructure, finance, and developers are so similar, but they're wildly different. And so very often I'll realize, like when meeting a developer, well, before COVID, talking to a developer online, like in one of our live streams or in different conversations, is when I talk about authentication, right? So I'll go into like the importance of card authentication, or how Face ID and biometric info is required to have certain payments in certain countries. A developer can often just jump straight to, oh yeah, auth, yeah, OAuth, I know what that is. And so you also don't want to be a jerk and tell them, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, but like, because the terms are similar, they're very they're all needed, but it's really hard when a developer is told by a founder, or they are the founder, or they work at a large company and they're the payment architect. Okay, get payments up and running. And so they're trying to solve it like an engineer would solve it. But if they don't have an idea of the revenue model, the business use case, how this syncs in with tax, revenue recognition, all these terms that are not in the developer world, but they are critical for payments, that can be like a non-starter to actually get payments up and running. So I guess that's addressing a big thing in the industry that happens often, and no developer wants to admit, like when you get started with payments, like just accept you have no idea what you're talking about, and take some time to like watch some foundational videos, read through the docs, really trying to wrap your head around how the heck does payments work. I think the second one is payments are progressive, right? So there are great no-code solutions. If you were a business and someone's trying to get payments running on day one, what's the easiest way to get payments running? Probably like a hosted checkout page, or just invoice, like sending a hosted invoice, just saying, okay, we're accepting some business, one-time payment, good. And then over time, like the founder and the tech team are going to figure out, like, okay, how should we extend our revenue model? Should we support both recurring and one-time payments? Should we also support in-person payments? And so it's kind of like figuring out your payment strategy and reducing friction requires you to have a baseline, and then build on that as your company starts to get more advanced in the strategies of optimizing your revenue flow.
Yeah, and one thing I felt like Stripe's done well over the last decade is making it more accessible to even non-developers to be at the table and be. Mm-hmm. So I think as developers, if we can have a domain expert from our company at the table as part of the conversation, we're going to be way better off. Where I think classically business and IT folks don't talk and don't hang out. But I think, Stripe simplified a lot of things along the way that with the low code options, with the accessibility of your documentations and your overall developer experience. I don't feel like you have to be a developer to land on Stripe's homepage, make your way around the site and understand what's going on, and be part of the conversation. You may not get your hands dirty when you dive into the SDKs and other things, but it's definitely makes it more accessible. Are you guys really trying to speak to business users as well as developers in all of this, or did it just happen by naturally?
So I would say, first off, as you know, being in the developer community world, one of the biggest mistakes we could make is say the word developer and think it's some all-in-one persona, right? So like the idea, there is no such thing as a developer, right? There's a blend of folks that are involved in the payment stack, right? So you need buy-in from the decision makers, from the product folks. You need developers understanding what their part in it, what their part in the payment stack is. And so very often, we're looking at what are the top requests we're seeing in support. What's the top, if you're on any one of our docs pages, you can actually like right there, give a thumb up or thumb down on the page and give us a note. We pour through those notes. And very often we'll see like the rise of no code or low code solutions, whether it's a Stripe solution or some partner that's integrating our API, it's increasing a lot. And so it's not enough to say, okay, we just focus on, our API ref or our deep docs. Like we really have to make sure if you're trying to get your no code app or platform up and running, you're going to pick the best tool possible to start collecting payments on day one. Often it's a partner's app, right? So we have this whole marketplace. We strongly recommend partners that make it just dead easy for you to get up and running, but also half the challenge is making sure you're just getting started with the right Stripe tool for your use case. I would say almost always it's going to be checkout or a deviation of that. So payment links is super popular right now because it lets you just generate one-time or programmatically reusable payment links where it's all hosted. You don't got to think about receiving webhooks and running a whole application. You just want to collect payment. And so those are I would say that's some of the biggest growth is docs and content, and especially video resources for folks that might not identify as a developer, but they're very much part of the decision-making process for a company.
Yeah, I think the whole classic product catalog, cart, checkout, that still exists, but I think that world is much more distributed. It's across social. It's across, like you said, in person. There's a lot, and so there's a lot more people who are implementing and setting those in motion. Not necessarily someone building a commerce app or a mobile app. We can sell something and ask for a payment in just about any business process that occurs throughout the day. So I can imagine that linking, is going to be pretty powerful. We're seeing that in the Postman ecosystem as well as embeddable. It's not about a single portal for developers anymore. It's about anywhere you need to initiate some API workflow or something that's API driven, and giving people embeddable links is pretty key. Another area that we're seeing a big shift is when it comes to open source. I mean, it's one of the hats I wear here at Postman. In addition to being the host of this show, is I run the Postman Open Technologies program, because we see the technology is often more open source, and the way the money's made is a lot different when it comes to API integrations. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that open source is a part of your title and what you do there. How does open source fit into the Stripe paradigm?
Yeah, so definitely open source it's so critical for everything we do within Stripe, but also how many of our customers are using open source, and one, they might not realize it. Or also payment stacks. There's many different areas of the payment stack, whether it's the application layer, the UI, actual collection of the payment, there's lots of open source packages, dependencies, and projects. And so two different areas. We've open sourced several projects, right? So Sorbet, it's for having strongly typed support for Ruby. Like Sorbet was like the big project we launched about a year and a half ago. We got several projects in the works that we're focusing on open sourcing for next year. So there's definitely like part of our team, we're a small team, open source the open source team at Stripe. And so we're focusing on making sure internally there's great candidates for things to open source. I think a lot of our effort actually has been on finding and identifying developers in the community who have been building excellent plugins or extensions or any type of libraries that help customers do more with Stripe, and just making sure, first off, we're reviewing a lot of them, we're dog fooding them. What I've been excited about is a lot of our engineers have been making contributions to popular Stripe plugins and frameworks. It's a big focus for us, honestly. The other thing we're super proud of is we launched a book, Stripe Press. It's like our book. We have a book publishing arm, and there was a book by Nadia Ergbal. She wrote Working in Public, and it's all about just the open source sponsorship model, open source just generally, and a little bit about the history of GitHub. But that book has definitely inspired us. And there's also a ton of new sponsorship players out there. Tidelift, GitHub sponsors, Open Collective. Oh, you got the book. Awesome. Yeah, that's it. It's actually a pretty beautiful book. But we love that there's all these companies and marketplaces launching around helping developers have sustainable open source projects. And that's definitely top of mind for us often in our world.
Yeah, that's a great book. So I like the way she tells the story. I mean, GitHub's a foundation for a lot of how we think about open source, or at least, the evolution of open source. I mean, it went from, Linus and Linux to now it's a more social, it's a more human thing. But I think from what you described, it's much more community driven now. It's much smaller, micro, it's plugins, it's even content and blueprints and tutorials. And we see that with Postman collections, is people building interesting workflows between multiple APIs, and then open sourcing, that script or that orchestration, that automation around that. And so open source is definitely, I think, going into kind of a third generation. I'm hoping, as far as it being more community driven. And what are some ways that you mentioned that some people don't even see open source or know that they're using it? What are ways that you recommend people can better notice and then maybe support those projects?
So I think on the onset, one thing that keeps coming up with our team, our developer advocate team, is very often developers have inherited a payments. I'll talk about payments in open source, I guess, to start, because I'm obviously biased. I care a lot about payments and folks having great integrations. But I think in the payments world, very often a developer inherited a payments integration, right? So there's obviously multiple gateways. We're not the only one. We know that. And we also know that a lot of customers need multiple payment solutions depending on the use case. And so Stripe is always used within the context of a broader app. And so often you inherit a payment integration. One thing that keeps popping up often is whoever is the head or responsible, at least for the payment integration, might not necessarily even be able to whiteboard out how payments are working at their company, right? So they might just say, oh yeah, it's set up through Laravel and something puts in the form field and then it goes to our Stripe account. And so one thing that comes up often with open source is, do you even know all the different pieces of code and plugins and libraries that are between you and your customer and revenue, right? And so just doing that inventory, I think, is really important. And then the second part, to bring it back to these open source maintainers, is just the empathy we have for these maintainers who often a maintainer had a problem. They needed to build a certain library or plugin for a very specific niche CMS or some type of framework that wasn't out there. They definitely, if you read the Working in Public book, a lot of these maintainers didn't sign up to do support for thousands of users that stumbled across their GitHub repo. And so one thing that's top of mind for us is, how often are these startups, SMBs, and enterprise just using some project, not thinking once about the health of that project, who's building it, in the long-term viability of using a product. And so the thing we've really been focused on is encouraging customers and developers, like, know who, if you are going to use open source projects, know who's building it. Definitely offer to help with code contributions, right? So updating open source projects, especially if it's something that stitches to other APIs, it takes work. And so often these developers are looking for support, even helping triage and tag issues. That's a big one. And I think for a lot of companies, and we could talk more on it, I think the call for, if you're using third-party code to collect revenue, one, know how that code works, right? Do a full review of it, but also what's the responsibility companies have to also consider sponsoring these developers who are building really important projects that they need. And so I think we're often thinking about that. We're noticing a lot of companies starting to figure out what's their how are they going to give back to either specific open source maintainers or even open sourcing projects that they've been running internally and haven't even thought that, oh, a lot of other developers could benefit from this.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, make sure that these projects are seen, make sure they're supported, they're secure. You know, all vulnerabilities are dealt with. I mean, you should just know your dependencies, and I mean, you should, like you said, you should have the inventory of these and understand how they work. I would say, if your developer that implemented that library, if you as a manager can carve out some time for that developer, give them 10-20% time to go to the repo for that library, spend time triaging, maybe just clean it, even if they're not contributing code, like help clean up the docs. There's so many things that they could do for that library to make it more usable, more sustainable, as well as, give money. I think money is an important one. And the more we support these, at least in the Postman ecosystem, the more we support these, I would say we have a direct line for talent acquisition in some of these. And I speak from a vantage point of, I've acquired a couple open source projects and brought them under our circus tent of Postman Open Technologies.
Yeah.
And it's because we want to support and sustain that open source project, but also because there were some really driven, passionate folks behind those projects that we wanted to actually work with closer. And so I don't think a lot of companies see these projects, and I don't think they see them as potential talent acquisition, people who are smart and can come in and help you do things. Not that you should acquire them and bring them internally, but find ways you can work closer with them. I think it's super important.
Yeah, it's an interesting battle. It's an interesting tension, right? So some of the best projects we find, developers are fiercely independent, but they would love and appreciate code contributions. They would appreciate us recommending their project if we think that it's going to be great for users. And so it has been interesting. Some of the most successful open source partnerships we've had are developers that are super proud of the framework. They know every in and out of a specific framework. Let's say Vue or Angular or something that's like they really care about that. Their full-time job is adjacent to that work, and or they do either freelance or contract, or they are monetizing their expertise, being the world expert in payments for a framework. And so often it is a dance of like making sure they feel supported, but also recommending great projects from the community. I know another thing that's top of mind I'd love to chat with you about. It is actually Postman related. I know this is not a Postman focused podcast, but just the importance of cutting down tech debt by keeping your API versions and the versions of these libraries or SDKs you're using up to date. I think that is the dirty secret of the payments world, is folks don't update their stuff out of fear of breaking changes.
Yes, man, you just hit on you brought up Postman, which we this is not a Postman show. We don't focus too heavily on. But then you managed to say breaking changes too. So you just win.
I kind of weave that. No, but seriously, like I talked to some, you imagine, right? So as a developer advocate, like at Stripe, I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to meet all these different startups and companies building incredible products. They're making revenue, right? So we're only working with folks that are charging for a good or service and rendering some value to a customer. And so I'm learning a ton about what revenue models work, which ones don't work, which ones have buzz, but actually, for improvement. And these understated companies that you've never heard of, they're not on Hacker News, but they're making hand over fist revenue because they started off on day one charging for their product in a reasonable way. And so, point is, I love the job because I get to meet all these different companies. What's been really interesting, though, as I hinted at, it's the biggest brands in the world, right? So I'll talk to their payments lead or the head dev who's building or improving their integration, and a lot of them, kind of in confidence, will tell me, "Oh my gosh, we haven't updated our API version in 5 years, in 4 years. Oh, the previous CTO integrated it, and the ones that are really honest are like, I don't want to be the person that breaks our payment flow. Like, we're making money, I don't want it to break." And so what I'm realizing is, just generally, I know this is probably not a surprise for you, Ken, but just generally, a lot of developers have not developed good hygiene around just regular incremental updating and upgrading of their tech stack, so that they don't go years on end not upgrading both their API versions and the versions of their SDKs. It kind of surprises me, but it doesn't surprise me. That's the state of many big brands you know of.
People fear change.
Yeah.
I mean, change is scary and people fear it. And like you said, people don't want to be that one to break it. But for me, breaking changes aren't bad. Only time breaking changes are bad is when they're not communicated and not planned for. And I would say Stripe has some amazing approach for managing versioning and communicating versioning. But I mean, why would you say these people, I mean, do they not know about your new versions? Are they not comfortable or confident updating their code? What's the biggest friction point for them moving forward?
I think it depends on the person, right? On the individual, but I know for like some examples, right? So payments, it is tempting, especially at Stripe, to we're in the news a lot. There's a lot of buzz around a business. It is tempting to forget that we are just one piece of your bigger web stack or your payment stack or your mobile. Like, we serve one place, and there's a lot of other services you probably use to support your customers. The reason I say that is because it is one in a bigger checklist of things the developer has to worry about. Very often, a CTO is also on the hook for payments. That CTO is trying to make sure all the latest builds go out to iOS and Android stores, app stores. They want to make sure top priority customers issues are getting dealt with. And so while we care a lot about API reliability, yes, we're proud that an API version from 6 years ago will still work because we want to make sure nothing breaks in your payment flow. But you're kind of leaving a lot of literal money on the table, and you are building up tech debt if you're not incrementally improving your stack, including payments. And so sometimes it's just, oh, someone built that a long time ago. It works. We don't want to break it, and we get a lot of other fish to fry. Another one is just a general culture, especially in the startup world, of celebrating ships, right? Celebrating new releases and kind of deprioritizing or not celebrating as much, keeping the lights on work and just having a really good testing plan, testing and upgrading plan. I think it's just, it's often that you're like, we'll deal with that later. I guess the last point I'll make to that is where it's extremely painful is while we will keep API versions working as long as humanly possible, you need to opt into upgrades for Stripe, right? So you need to say, I'm ready to use the latest version of the API, or on a per API call basis, you can tell us what version of the API you want back from us. Where it gets really challenging is when a country or a suite of countries or some regulatory authorities like, hey, so Face ID or thumbprint, fingerprint recognition is required starting September. And it's happening and you got to deal with it. And so that's where it's like when you look for a new job, it's better to look for a new job when you already got a job. Same with API upgrades. It's great to upgrade and have a plan for testing before you're told you have to by this date update or payments will stop working. And that's the worst case scenario, I think, for devs is, oh my gosh, we haven't touched this in forever.
Well, and you guys done so much of the work in moving forward with versions and reducing the friction for people so that it's not as painful to go from even major to major, because you guys have done a lot of the thinking and reduce that. And so I mean, teams need to be more agile and nimble when it comes to change and addressing change, so that they're not caught off guard when these regulatory things come into play, and they have to all of a sudden just jump and make a change. They need to be like thinking about this in an ongoing way, but getting leadership to approve that and prioritize that. But I like what you touched on as far as you're literally leaving money on the table. I think that's the message I would leave for leadership, to carve out space for their teams to invest in change and evolution. Is there's all of this new types of payments, new ways of making payments, micro payments, different ways of doing it that your newer APIs are enabling. And if you're not upgrading your version, you're literally, those things are out of reach, and you're not able to remain competitive, stay agile, nimble when it comes to your industry.
I think I'll add to that, right? So it's also tempting for companies to just clump everything around payments into a set of functions or one area of problems to solve. And the reality is, like, if you break up payments, right? So your customer onboarding flow, that is something you can upgrade in and of itself by itself. You might have a one-time payment and recurring payment offerings. I know whenever I go into an app in the App Store and I look at like all the different in-app purchase options, you kind of often can see a history of all the different payment tiers they've created. Point being, like, if you break them all out, it's like any complex project, right? If you break them all out and decide what are the things we need to fix now, what are the things can wait, it's less overwhelming than, oh my gosh, we need to fix our payments. And it's like such an amorphous challenge to face. But certainly the success stories I hear that I love hearing is, okay, we needed to upgrade our integration, and we actually removed like 10,000 lines of code because we realized we were manually running a recurring billing system, and we could just cut it and go with your billing offering. I'm saying this so this is applicable for any payment gateway, not to just make it about us, but like very often if you built some application or function 5 years ago, there's probably better ways to do it now. And certainly, like, things are not set in time. So like for our own, like I was looking up the numbers for this call, right? So we handle, like this year alone, like we're handling, I think it's about 5,000 requests every second for our API. This year alone, we've deployed over 3,300 times, and about every weekday, it's about 13 to 14 versions of our API we cut a day, like each weekday. And so the point is like, imagine 6 years of that. And yes, it's going to work, it's going to function, but oh my gosh, like, become an expert in payments. So you make sure every single drop of what your customer wants is available for them and also for your setup.
Yeah, you guys have embraced change. I think that's one in the people I'm interviewing for the show, the companies that are leading the API conversation are releasing often, and they have processes in place to allow for that, to deliver more reliable APIs, and then support. I think not just the producer needs, but supporting the consumers is a super critical part of this. And so when you're the front line for that, what do you look for when you're hiring team members or bringing people onto your team to kind of support this perpetual march forward of the Stripe API?
So for sure, we're looking for developers who really, really, really care. So I think that first and foremost is when it comes to long-term health and upgrade of your APIs, when it comes to our developer tooling, like making sure developers like are feeling, like all things developer relations, right? Where it's not only getting news out from the company to the community, but it's also, I think one of the most important things is driving empathy for developers from the community internally, right? And so I love my relationship with our product teams, right? Our product teams, they really care about developer feedback. We have a champions program where we definitely take our most ardent, most avid developers, and they have a direct relationship with our product teams, right? And I think you'd be surprised how much on Twitter, like our engineers, our PMs are answering or asking questions. And so I guess developer feedback is super important for us. And another for new candidates and also folks that join our team, we really cherish this thing called the friction log, right? So we're really we try to dog food as much as possible, and I'm talking every team: product, engineering, marketing, support. And what that means is just opening up a new doc, and if we've released a new feature or existing features or trying to use two or more of our products all together, just like writing out the experience of getting up and running with it, what worked, what didn't, what could be better. And that's definitely like a internal form of currency, right? So the folks that are just genuinely curious, they're down to try out new products we're releasing, even if they're not on that team. It goes a long way because I really appreciate when we've released something, right? So we just released our new Postman collection. We just released, my team built and released the new React Native SDK. I really appreciate when folks internally, but also externally, help keep me honest, make sure that it's working great. And I can't tackle all the bugs. And so feedback is a gift. I'll make one other plug. I've been getting super hooked on this. There's a community site called, and it's also a series of books too. It's called APIs you won't hate.com. And so there's a book,
Phil Sturgeon's
yeah,
world.
Phil, Mike Bafulco, Matt, Mike, and Phil. But that book, Surviving Other People's APIs, I absolutely have been loving the content and the podcast. Not to plug another podcast, but there is a finite amount of us who care deeply about API, both resiliency, functionality, the long-term health of an API. And I wish we were in a pandemic so we could all just get together and chat, but for sure, we're trying to learn a ton from lessons learned from other companies and API platforms.
Yeah, those lessons. I mean, I've been on the podcast and big fans of what the energy they put out over there, because they're very human and community oriented and about doing this well and reducing the pain and friction. And then Phil's whole environmental
Yes.
and bike riding and just
Yes.
other
I love it.
it adds a whole nother, it's a good vibe. So yeah, I mean, I would say the empathy piece, I think, is the most critical piece. I mean, that's the next generation developer. I would say is, the old days when you would hire developers and they were antisocial and you kept them in the basement and slid pizza under the door. Those days seem to be gone. We don't want those types of antisocial developers. We need you to actually be interested, have passion, have kind of fire under your imagination when it comes to this, and want to be playing with things and understanding things. And I think I think that's why that back to the talent acquisition that I mentioned in the ecosystem. I mean, these externally, these are the developers that shine and show up on our radar. They become Postman Supernovas, as we call them.
Oh yeah.
And they're people we end up hiring. We end up investing in if they're doing open source. And so I think message out there for anybody listening is that if just do what you do, be passionate about it, and demonstrate why what you're doing and what you're interested in matters, and people will take notice in the ecosystem. But I think API providers, if you have a team that empathizes with your community and empathizes with the challenges your customers face, it's just going to go so much further and have such more impact. You guys are how do you guys look around the world? I mean, you mentioned you hire a lot around the globe, but your team is pretty geographically dispersed around the world these days.
Yeah. Yes. Especially, I mean, we've always been pretty spread out. We've had regional offices, but I think as of this year, we're at least we're in over 50 cities worldwide. And so we can hire in many different countries. I think at least 25% of our engineers are remote. That's about 3 times more than before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think one thing that is really important for us is building the best payments experience requires developers and requires your engineers to be in region. And so it's so often that as a Western hemisphere based developer, we all think the world revolves around cards. I know I mentioned that earlier, but it's only until you're actually watching how you do payments or remittances in Japan, or you watch how in Mexico you go up to an OXXO gas station and you literally can do your payment flow for larger purchases. Until you see that back and forth payment, that whole payment flow, you realize like, oh my gosh, the rest of the world is actually way ahead of us. We still are focused on this piece of plastic, where the rest of the world is using their super expensive mobile phone to do biometric Face ID. And then you start thinking like the risk gets shifted. If so I could geek out forever, like, but basically, like, the biggest thing is if you use a plastic card, it takes there's a couple of weeks you got to wait to make sure it clears, right? Or a couple of days at least to make sure it clears. The rest of the world is on really advanced payment methods where the payments can sometimes be instant for the merchant because it's an authenticated payment where the customer is known, and it's reducing your fraud risk. And I think that's we're really focused on our engineers being in region, but also supporting our payment methods. I think right now it's like we're available to at least over 44 countries, but I'm pretty sure we can accept card payments from customers in across like 195 countries. So we're trying to be everywhere where someone's trying to get payments done.
Well, I'm guessing the people not upgrading their apps and their API version feeds into some of what you just said, as far as, leaving money on the table. They're not able to enable smartphone payments, and that's why things are so slow here, is because we're so risk adverse, or the leadership just doesn't see the business value of investing and making the switch to a more full digital world. But I think that's what everyone's being faced with right now, or at least what we're seeing is, the API reality is catching up to every company in every industry, and they're going to have to start paying attention to it. I'm hoping COVID's kind of going to speed this up, because the need for more contactless payments, more digital delivery, all different types of things are going to speed that up. How's COVID shifted the way you guys are seeing things and working? Has it changed how your team? You guys were remote somewhat before, but has it changed how you guys operate?
For sure. I think it has definitely changed how we operate. I know, at least for my team, right? So our developer advocacy team, we're spread across over 8 time zones. And so really putting an emphasis on asynchronous moments of connection, right? So we have folks across Asia, across, North America, South America, Europe. We have a lot of developers in the community that are everywhere from Johannesburg to Australia, all over. And so all the reason I'm saying that is like trying to get points across while you cannot get everyone in the room at the same time. It's challenging. And then also building trust both with external developers, but your own team is challenging, right? And so you can imagine we've been heavily using, I know there's whatever chat platform you use, a lot of them are starting to release things like asynchronous video clips, which is a mixture of screen sharing, video. We do a lot with just like video, right? So not just Zoom calls, but actual, hey, I wanted to show you this, have a look at this. So I know if you use Slack, it's Slack clips. I know some other teams use like apps like Marco Polo or any type of video type app to build. You kind of over time build trust and connection by seeing each other, but also working through stuff. I know some of my closest friends from my old days at early Evernote and from Roku and all these places I've been at. It's the folks that we kind of went through some tough challenges, and we built stuff together through adversity on behalf of the developers. Like that requires a lot of connection and communication. It's hard to do if you're only doing text chat only. So that's one. I think the other one is we're trying to be very flexible about meeting times. And so either we split up, EMEA versus Southeast Asia versus the US. We are trying to, like, when we have meetings and we all can't be there, like writing up the top points, putting them in our channels. And now, I mean, gosh, we have product teams. We have teams leading different aspects of our product in all our different hubs, right? So we have 2 co-hubs, right? The Dublin office, the San Francisco office. But then also we got folks all across Europe. We got the payment method teams. I mean, they're in all the different regions because they have to build that product in region. And so I make sure like I cut out, I do my solid work. I make sure like I do turn notifications off, and I do emphasize like I'm flexible with my time, but really the more we can do asynchronous, the better. But yes, post COVID, I cannot wait to actually meet more team members, and I miss it so much.
Yeah, I miss the in-person, those relationships that were built over the last decade. And your old dog been in the space doing this for a while, so I know that in-person conference meetups, and just the restaurant, the food, the drinks, all that surrounds all of that, people coming together. So what else are you doing to not burn out? Because that sounds like a lot. So what else do you do just personally, Trag? What do you do to keep yourself passionate and motivated after so long in the industry?
I'm trying to learn a couple of things, right? So I've really fallen down the rabbit hole of video streaming and just really getting the whole team like thinking about like video first, right? And so as you mentioned, right, I've been doing dev relations for, I think it was about 10 years ago, I became a developer advocate at Evernote. Moved to California from Boston, started getting there. And one thing that has been eye-opening is just the importance of video. And I really did not understand how important YouTube is as like the second most popular search engine on earth. And so whether it's the weekend and I'm not working at all, right? Like just trying to fix something on my car or do something with my kids, like I'm trying to use YouTube like a ton more, like as a way of visually learning different concepts, whether it's coding, whether it's something around the house, whether it's I'm trying to improve a skill or public speaking. And so that's one, is just like watching more videos than just recorded, series and TV stuff. I think the other one is just trying to, I try very often to get lunch or coffees, COVID safe, obviously, but there is tons of, I live in Austin, Texas now. So I moved from San Francisco to Austin, the Exodus along with a ton of other folks. And there is just a ton of developers based in Austin building great products. And I am trying to get out and get coffee. I get so inspired when I hear developer stories about payments and what they're trying to build or the frameworks are looking. So I am just kind of using the local city as a way to get inspired for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's trying to cut off on the weekends, right? Like just trying to remind myself like it's all going to be here tomorrow. And half the time the emergencies are because of a lack of planning. So we're really trying to plan out month to month. What's the thing I have to get done or the team has to get done? And really focusing on that. I think every single day I do the Pareto principle, right? Like 20% of the outcome for 80% of the results. And just like staying focused is, my time is not my own anymore, so trying to work on all those to not get burned out.
Yeah. And we are so much our own worst enemies, and
Yes.
everything you just said, not taking away the weekend, not planning properly. All good advice. Definitely. Well, I look forward to when the world somewhat gets back to normal and I can come to Austin again. I love Austin. I love walking around downtown down there, and not just for the big events, just coming and just hanging out. There's a great vibe down there. So a little bit jealous. I'm in the Bay Area, so still loving, still holding down the fort while you all just left town.
I mean, technically, I moved in 2016. I joined this tiny YC startup, and we all moved out to Austin. But so I guess I'm like an old timer Austin now. But one of my favorite things is so random, but for developer meetups is we have a ton. San Francisco has them too, but we have a ton of these like half coffee shop, half bars. And so what I like is like meeting up with developers, and there's no pressure to drink. Like I just want to like have a cup of coffee, because very often, back in the day with developer relations events, there's kind of this like pressure when you're at some evening event. And so I've just been loving like I'll get a decaf coffee. And then I'm not a wreck afterwards in terms of feeling
Yeah.
full. And I'm also like can focus on the conversation. And so I kind of love these, like I'm really geeking out on these half coffee shop, half bar situations for the rest of us.
Well, I think that's an important life hack as we get older. That's a
Yes.
good old timer rule.
Seltzer
'cause
water with a
I
lime,
can,
please.
yes. I mean, I can point out in 2014, 2016, where I burnt out pretty heavily, and it was pretty much due to me drinking beer, and so that's good advice.
I think the one other thing I'll add, I know that's not the focus for this session, but like in terms of dev relations and dev advocacy, I know I've written a little bit about it. I wrote this post on the golden age of developer advocacy. One thing, if we compare life pre-COVID as a developer advocate to now, is in the past, just when we talk about video first, in the past, I'd give it, I'd speak at Twilio Signal, or I'd speak at some event, and maybe there's a couple thousand folks in the room. I hope to God maybe 500 people are interested. I really hope that evening or the next day they actually try out the code or the sample I talked about. Now that everything's video first, even if we are at an in-person thing and we're recording and cutting it for our channel, like it's just wild, like the amount of metrics developer advocacy teams have at their disposal that we didn't have before. Yeah. And so I know, like when one of our advocates or myself presents on a topic, I know how many folks dropped off, how many folks were interested. And then it also lets us know, like, okay, what next batch of content should we make? I just have all this data I never had. And so I do COVID has been miserable for many reasons, but one upside in our field is just how much we can improve our offering to the community because we just have a whole suite of data we never had before when we were only, flying around to events and stuff. And so it's been pretty wild.
Yeah, I feel more effective too. So I agree. But we'll see. We'll see what the future holds. With that said, we just rolled over an hour, and I almost didn't notice because I could just keep talking with you all day. So with that said, we should probably let folks go. I appreciate you joining me today, Chris. This has been great. Look forward to many more conversations. We're planning season 2. And so I'll be pinging you about what maybe we could talk about next season.
I love it. Ken, thank you so much for having me, and I'm a huge fan of the show. Much appreciated.
All right. Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll be talking soon.
Thanks, you too.